In the AIM video, I said integrated graphics had come a long way over the years. While that is true, I could just as easily say integrated graphics sucked for over a decade since the debut of the 3D-capable chipset in 1998. Sure, there were highlights like Nvidia's Enforce 2 IGP from 2002, but it was still a given that onboard graphics would compromise on their 3D feature set and performance. It wasn't until 2011 that that changed, and change came in the form of the original A8 APU. The road to the APU's creation was a long and painful one. As far back as 2006, AMD under Hector Ruiz's leadership sensed that they would need to invest in graphics to get a leg up on Intel, and first looked to Nvidia for a possible merger. Mr. Leather Jacket Man would only consider the idea if he were made CEO of the combined company. Ruiz wasn't about to agree to that, and his sights turned to ATI. On October 25, 2006, AMD announced that they had finalized their acquisition of ATI for a massive $5.4 billion. In the announcement, AMD revealed their Fusion initiative, where CPU and GPU would come together on the same silicon, setting the stage for the APU well before the term existed. The plan was to launch in late 2008 or early 2009, but that didn't end up happening. The best manufacturing process AMD had at that time was the same 45nm node used by the Phenom 2 series, but it proved non-viable for the GPU portion of the chip. AMD then took a two-prong approach. The low-end Atom Killer Brazos APUs would release first and use TSMC's 40nm process they had already been deploying in GPUs starting with the Radeon HD 4770. For the higher-end Llano platform, AMD and their spin-off fab GlobalFoundries had to cook up a new 32nm process, one that would be suitable for both CPU and GPU. It wouldn't be until June of 2011 that Llano would see release, first for laptops, then for desktops 2 weeks later. There were only two desktop SKUs at first, the 100W A6 3650 and A8 3850, but 65W models would trickle out over the coming months. Today's guinea pig is the A8 3820. It's only noteworthy for being the fastest 65W APU on socket FM1, but since the GPU is identical to the A8 3850s, it'll do. The 3820 is part of the final wave of refreshed socket FM1 APUs, announced at the tail end of 2011 alongside unlocked models like the A8 3870K. While the 3820 was originally intended for use in OEM machines like this HP Pavilion P7, it did eventually get a list price of $129, putting it in direct competition with Sandy Bridge i3s like the 2125. The CPU portion is based on the K10 architecture as seen in AMD's earlier Phenom CPUs. It's essentially an Athlon 2 X4 with an improved memory controller and double the L2 cache. The Bulldozer-based AMD FX wouldn't launch for another 4 months, so this was the newest thing AMD had ready at the time. The A8 3820 in particular ships with a base clock of 2.5 GHz and a boost clock of 2.8 GHz. By K10 standards, this is pretty slow, and likely a result of poor 32nm yields and K10 not being a great fit for the new process. Instruction set support further kneecaps the platform. SSSE3, SSE 4.1 and 4.2, and AVX are all missing, so games like Apex Legends will refuse to launch, not that you'd want to play them on a pre-Ryzen APU anyway. The GPU, despite its Radeon HD 6000 series branding, is based on the older HD 5500 series. The full-fat HD 6550D configuration found in A8 models packs 400 terascale 2 cores at 600 MHz, so it'll be a bit slower than an HD 5570 discrete card at 650 MHz stock. AMD did include the newer UVD3 video decoding block from the HD 6000 series though, and I'll be testing that later. API support is limited to DirectX 11, OpenGL 4.5, and OpenCL 1.2, so I've had to skip quite a few synthetic benchmarks. The A8's memory controller is rated for DDR3 1866, so I've paired it with two decent 8GB sticks from Crucial, the same ones from the W3690 video. The Asus F1A75-M Pro BIOS allows you to reserve up to 2GB of system RAM for the IGP to use, so I've done that. I'm using the Catalyst 15.11.1 beta driver because OpenCL is broken on Crimson 16.2.1. Before we get to the benchmarks, let's talk overclocking. The 3820 doesn't have unlocked multipliers, so you're stuck with pushing the base clock. On this motherboard, 148 MHz is as high as I can reliably go. At 149 MHz, I'll often get post failures and have to reset the BIOS, and that's after raising these two secondary voltages. This board doesn't let you control the GPU multiplier, so I ended up with a final GPU clock of 888 MHz. 48% OC isn't bad at all, but I know the silicon can go further, and that's something I want to look at in the future with the unlocked A8 3870K. On the CPU I hit just over 3.4 GHz, but it took more than 1.5 volt V-core and medium load line calibration to get there. Llano generally doesn't clock very well. I've hit 4.1 GHz on a Phenom 2 X4 980 with this same Scythe Mugen 5 Rev C cooler, but this is the best I've personally gotten on an FM1 so far. Compared to the base 2.5 GHz, this is a roughly 36% improvement, but against the 2.8 GHz boost clock it's only 22%. The scaling you're about to see in real benchmarks will depend on how often that boost is active. For the RAM, I didn't do much. The closest setting to stock at this B clock is DDR3 1973, so I used that with TRAS tightened slightly from 27 to 24. This isn't even a 6% gain to memory bandwidth, so it'll be interesting to see how much games actually improve. We'll kick off with some CPU testing in Cinebench. All three versions show gains in the low 30% from OC, which is a great showing as far as I'm concerned. GPU Pi sees only a hair less scaling, still around 30% faster with OC. The overclocked A8 easily takes the lead in PCMark 7 back from the Celeron N3450 seen in the Zima board video. These aren't pure CPU tests, so that's likely why none of these quite reach the 30% mark we've seen so far. The math tests are all looking pretty good. The single-threaded SuperPi is the least good of them, but at 28% scaling, I'm not complaining. Even with the overclock, the A8 can't overcome its SSD 4.2 deficiency in X265, and the Celeron holds on to its crown. The rest of the benchmarks are a bloodbath for the Zima board as you'd expect by now. In all the legacy Direct3D tests, the overclock nets between 20 and 30% more points. It's the same story for the D3D10 based 3D marks. There's not much to say here. D3D11 curiously gains more from OC than the other GPU benchmarks we've seen so far. I'm guessing this is because the tests are more shader intensive and thus rely less on memory bandwidth. Catzilla returns to the low 20%, with 4K gaining the most from the overclock. Unigen's benchmarks are similar, with roughly 25% scaling. Across all the CPU tests, the overclocked A8 is just about 30% faster than stock. GPU scaling is a bit worse at 26.5%, but I consider this a great result. Remember, memory bandwidth is barely any higher with the overclock, so the takeaway here is that OC is very much worth it, even if you're like me and don't like RAM tuning. Let's see if that remains true in actual games. Since this is a 2011 APU, we'll start with the 2011 game. After back-to-back videos of having to use rock-bottom settings, it's nice to see playable performance in Skyrim with some eye candy on. With the overclock, we're still not seeing lows above 30 FPS. I'd highly recommend trading 4x MSAA for anisotropic filtering to get some performance back. Max Payne 3 delivers a GPU beating the likes of which was scarcely seen in 2012, and I've had to drop all the settings to their lowest and the resolution to 576p to scrape past a 30 FPS average in this very demanding scene. The overclock helps a ton, though like Skyrim, we're still a hair away from 30 FPS lows. To put these numbers into perspective, here's the scene running on 7th gen consoles. They're even worse off than the A8 is. We're firmly in better than console territory in Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, and you don't even have to disable DX11 to get there. The overclock does absolutely nothing for 0.1% lows, and the average frame rate isn't much higher either. Call of Juarez Gunslinger is worlds better on the A8 than the Zima board, not that that's a surprise. The overclock delivered a 25% uplift to 0.1% lows, and you can feel it. Dota 2 is a perfect example of live service bloat. It's been around for over a decade and still gets updates at breakneck pace, to the detriment of its performance. I can't make heads or tails of what's going on in this pro match replay thanks to the 40% resolution scale, and the frame rate drops into the teens all too often. Overclocking helps a little, but there's no saving this one. The A8 is at least fast enough to maintain lip sync in Temple of Osiris, but this cutscene is still a tough challenge. The The overclock pushes the average frame rate over the 30 FPS line in one of the better examples of in-game performance scaling we'll see today. Civ 6 doesn't demand high frame rates, but I'd still prefer a 30 FPS average where possible. Overclocking gets me there, and cuts more than a second and a half off turn times. I also tested the much more demanding Gathering Storm benchmarks. I don't have much to say about these, it's more the same. Dirt 4's wealth stages are uniquely demanding, probably because of all those trees. There are somewhat frequent bouts of bad frame pacing that overclocking does nothing to address. What it does do is deliver a 36% boost to both averages and 1% lows, and that makes a world of difference to playability. The A8 delivers impressive performance in Red Faction Guerrilla Re-Mars-tered, considering how many explosions it has to deal with. The overclock really helps take the edge off the framerate drops in the busiest moments. Last up, as promised, is Gulfit. There's no need to reduce the resolution scale this time, because the APU holds its head above water. This is the single biggest performance leap from overclocking in the suite, at a massive 42%. Good stuff. Before I wrap this thing up, let's test that video block. I use Thorium for my pre-Windows 10 browsing needs, and on K10 the best choice is the SSE3 build. With the H.264ify extension installed, the best this APU can handle on YouTube without dropping frames is 1080p 30. Even 720p 60 is too much for it, and overclocking does nothing to change that. Luckily, UVD3 can handle local 1080p 60 H.264 playback no problem. UVD3 won't accelerate anything beyond 1080p, so the CPU is on its own there. After all that testing, it's clear the first-gen APU has its limitations. On the CPU side, the middling instruction set restricts its usability somewhat, especially against the AVX-capable Sandy Bridge from the same year, and HD 6550D is most comfortable sticking to games from the 7th console generation. Still, the fact that any integrated graphics from 2011 can deliver these results is a marvel, and AMD deserves all the credit in the world for making it happen. The APU is a testament to AMD's resilience. The company's existence was riding on them, and they pulled through and made integrated graphics more than a joke. Sure, Llano itself wasn't much more than an Athlon 2 and a Radeon smushed together, but it paved the way for the company's future in consoles and later handheld gaming PCs, and made Intel take graphics more seriously. The APU is a win for all PCs, and this hobby of ours is better off for it.